Well, welcome everybody to our very special episode of Just Talk Live. Destiny and I, in light of the protests that are happening in response to police brutality and the killings of our Black and Brown siblings, we thought that just a mention of it in our next episode was not enough, and we wanted to have an episode dedicated to speak about the protests that are happening right now in our country. And we wanted to bring the voices of activists and protesters to this conversation who are on the ground doing this work that is very vital to our society right now. And so we are here with our siblings who are doing the work of racial justice and protest right now, and we are inviting them to tell their experience to us, to offer us ways to understand what is going on, and to give us some practical ways of being in the world right now and to make a difference and to make change in our lives personally, but also communally. And so we welcome our guest. We are so grateful that you are here. Thank you for being here, and it is a blessing to be a witness to the work that you are doing. And I also want to say welcome to my co-host Destiny, who is a bright spot in my life, and it is an amazing time to be working together with her. So I am going to invite our first guest, Marcus, to tell us where you are, what you're doing, the experiences that you are having right now in your community, and then to offer us some ways to understand what's going on. So Marcus is going to speak to his experience right now.
How y'all doing, everyone? My name is Marcus Milbury. I'm from Pennsylvania, Central Pennsylvania. I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina 3 years ago. So I've been down south for the past 3 years. I love the city. I love everything that it has to offer, but the police brutality across this whole country needs to stop. I'm tired of seeing and hearing about how unarmed Americans are getting killed every single day. The Department of Justice needs to step up. The White House needs to step up, and the police need to step up. I am peacefully protesting every single day in the uptown Charlotte area, making sure that we continue to demonstrate peacefully and let our message be heard. We are tired of getting killed, being unarmed. And we don't have to even talk about black and white, because there are white cops and black cops killing white Americans. At the end of the day, we are all one. We are all American. The Department of Justice really needs to step up and try to change the laws and do a police reform. We need better cops trained. And I encourage everyone to continue to be peacefully while we allow our message to be heard. We have to go to the polls. We have to vote during local elections. We have to change laws. We need to fill up the capitals, and across each state, the capitol buildings need to be filled with protesters demanding for change. That's the only way this country is going to change, by passing laws to make sure that unarmed Americans are not getting killed. Today, I'll be at a protest in the uptown Charlotte area. It starts at 5 o'clock. I encourage anybody that's in my area to take part. We will be on North Tryon and 4th Street, starting off at. We are in a troubling time. It's very sad out here. We have a person in the White House that does not have any type of leadership role. He's not showing unity. He's more of dividing the country apart. And the time when we need a president the most, we don't have a president. And now we're in a whole pandemic. I'm sorry, I get frustrated sometimes. I get worked up about this situation because it's like every single week we have to go through this, or every other couple months we have to go through this about protesting because cops are trigger happy.
Marcus, can you tell us a little bit about your experience? Is this your first time? Let me ask first. Is this your first time engaging in a civil protest?
No, I've been protesting for about good 6 years on different types of like injustice across the country.
And what was the first protest that sparked your interest to get engaged?
I think my first protest I had was in Stoughton, Pennsylvania, when the Department of Environmental came into our town about the water situation. Our water was just like Flint's. I'm not sure if everyone knows about the Flint situation that happened in Michigan, but our water was contaminated, and our borough council did not notify our residents about it. It took like 6 or 7 months for them to tell us, hey, we have bad drinking water. So when I found out about what was going on with the water situation, I continued to go to city council meetings, let the public know what was going on, protesting, hey, if you can't let us know about what's really going on with our health, with the public order, you need to get off of office. So like I've been protesting for a while now with different types of topics. But police brutality, those protests seems to never end.
Thank you. And just to give some background context about Stoughton, what is the demographic, or what are the people, who are majority of people that live there? What is their welfare? What is their racial compensation? Can you give us a little bit more about Stoughton? Because Stoughton is one of those small places, just like Harrisburg, where I'm from, where if you're not from there, you probably are involved in the steel industry. You don't know too much about Stoughton. So can you just give us a little background about the demographics there that started your first protest?
Yes, Stoughton is in central Pennsylvania. It sits in Dauphin County. We have 6,000 residents. We were the first steel mill in the whole country to produce steel. So we have a lot of historical things going on in Stoughton. We are made up with, I would say, half white, half black, a lot of Puerto Ricans. It's a very low income base. A lot of people are living poorly in Stoughton. And it hurts to see an area like that, especially Harrisburg. Like Harrisburg is the capital of Pennsylvania. Harrisburg can actually change laws for the whole state if we actually stuck together and then went to the capital and demand change. It's just a poor city hurting.
And Marcus, for our young, because the basis of our talk show is to engage young adults, what is the message you would send to young adults about protesting and how they can engage in their community during this time of COVID-19?
I would say speak up for any injustice that you see. Don't be scared. Don't be afraid. Continue to allow your word to be heard. For all the young people out there, we have to stick together. We have to. Especially during these troubling times, we have to stick together, young people. We have to encourage each other to vote. We have to encourage each other to register to vote. We just have to come together as one and say enough is enough. Young people are more powerful than what we think. And that's what we need to start embracing, that we can actually control the Senate. We can actually control everything if the young people come together. Everybody 18 and over, we must stick together. We must start changing laws. I'm tired of people that's 60, that's 70 running this country. They still have a platform of the 60s. during segregation. So it's like our young people that are woke need to come together and wake up people that are sleeping.
And Marcus, I know you're in Charlotte right now.
Yes.
I'm from a little town just about 2 hours south of there. And right now, a lot of church folk are watching this, a lot of people of faith. And as we know, the South is part of that Bible Belt. And so there's a lot of misconceptions about protests when it comes to church folk. And so I wonder what you can say to people of faith, people in the pews, people who are part of the church, who don't understand this, and who in many ways speak against it. So I wonder what you would say to church folk who are having these conversations right now.
To all my church folks out there that have a very biased opinion on the protesters out there, we want to be peaceful. We want to demonstrate how peaceful we are. We go out to the streets, probably block off traffic, but we are tired of the same things over and over and over. No convictions after a police officer kills unarmed Americans. Like, we are trying to be peaceful, But I can tell you one thing, we can't continue to pray and read a Bible if it doesn't change laws.
Thank you, Marcus. And before we move on to Visha, do you have any closing remarks or parting remarks that you want to give our audience regarding protest?
I just want to say to all the protesters out there, continue to be peaceful, continue to engage with other peaceful protesters. The ones that are violent and the ones that are looting and destroying the country, that's not what we stand for. We stand for peace, we stand for justice, and we are trying to change laws. We need to get out November and vote. We need to vote in local elections. We need to start engaging in politics. That's the big thing. Young people do not engage enough in politics. We need to start going to every city council meeting. But thank you for allowing me to address a couple of my concerns with y'all.
Thank you for being here, Marcus. Thank you so much. And now we are going to invite Visha to talk with us. Visha is in Louisville, Kentucky, which, if many people do not know, many people don't know where Unbound, where all this sits. It sits in Louisville, Kentucky. So these protests are happening where an entire denomination is sitting. And so Visha is going to speak about that experience and offer us a word that we need to hear. So Visha, we invite you to share with us today.
Thank you all for inviting me and us. So my name is Visha P. Souza. I am currently an alumni of Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary. So I just graduated in May. I am a non-Black person of color. I'm Polynesian. So I come from Oceania. I'm from Hawaii. I have been engaging in civil disobedience, if you would call it, since around 2014. I was involved in some die-ins that we had in Louisville after the Mike Brown situation, where several activists from Louisville went to Ferguson and came back and shared their stories. And after they came back and shared their stories, they opened up a space called Books and Breakfast. So shout out to those people. After that, I organized a water run to Flint, which we all know Flint still has unclean water. And most current, I was in Charlotte for the Keith Lamont Scott civil unrest that took place down there in 2016 or 2017, I believe, somewhere around there, because my friend was actually the teacher to the child of Keith Lamont Scott. So I was down there and engaged in that, which was pretty peaceful the second night for the most part, after $90,000 worth of damage was caused. This past weekend, I was part of the protesting down in downtown Louisville, Kentucky. And we have to understand where downtown is. And so you have a section of Louisville, such as 4th Street, that caters to people that have money. So the socioeconomic status down there is people that are a little bit more richer than others. Not to say that there's not Black and brown people, or that there's not white people down there that aren't for Black and brown causes. Let's get that clear right now, because there are Black businesses on 4th Street. So that's first and foremost. So when we were down there peacefully protesting on Friday, it started actually on Thursday, but when I was down there on Friday, I took one of my friends who is a nurse practitioner, and I work in the medical field. I work in psych. So I am also a Kia'i on Mauna Kea, which is a sacred space in Hawaii. And so I took my medical stuff to Mauna Kea and to the unrest over the weekend. So I'm much like Marcus when I get like flustered and frustrated with everything in my words. So sometimes I may pause just a little bit, because if I don't, I'm going to start crying, and we don't want that to happen. So yeah, this Friday, it was a little unnerving to know that we were peacefully protesting in front of the Hall of Justice in Louisville, Kentucky on 6th and Jefferson. And while we were there peacefully protesting, we were tear gassed by the police because we were crowded together, right? So we were all together in one space, and they were trying to disperse the crowd, which is what they usually do. It's tactical. That's not something uncommon. Prior to that, all Black and brown people stood back as white allies were asked to come to the front and protect us from the police, which is also a common tactic by leaders. I think that we have to understand that whenever we're engaged in civil disobedience or civil unrest, we must know who the leaders are. Most of the time, you can tell who they are. Most of the time, you can't. So being involved in that, because you can actually tell if it's disorganized. And you'll hear a lot of people say, you will hear people say, oh, this is disorganized, who's leading, what's going on here and what's going on there. And so you have to remember that when you do engage in stuff like this, sometimes you want to know who the leaders are because you want to follow their lead. And like for Black Lives Matter Louisville, if they're leading, then they will say it. And I'm not sure about other places around the country, but whoever's in lead, they will say that they're in lead. Not to create a hierarchy, but just to have some kind of direction of where we're going and what we're doing so that the disbursement doesn't look unorganized, if that makes sense. So after we, peacefully protested and got tear gas, that's when things started to go downhill a little bit. And we have to understand that the police are agitators, right? And so even afterwards, after all that happened and people did disperse in different parts of downtown Louisville, and I'm saying downtown Louisville because downtown Louisville starts at a certain area and ends about 9th Street. So anything past 9th Street is not really downtown-ish. It's called the West End, which is a predominantly Black community. And so they call it the 9th Street Divide. So anything before 9th Street, it's downtown Louisville. So we walked between 2nd and 7th. Tear gas, pepper bullets were used on peaceful protesters. And then around 11:30, 12 o'clock, 12:30, midnight, it started to get violent. Now, between Friday and Saturday, you can tell the big difference because of the type of vandalism that was going on downtown on 4th Street and in little areas in the vicinity, such as 5th Street, 3rd Street, and all those kind of areas. And so the vandalism there was an act of rage, right? So people want to be heard. Black people want to be heard. Brown people want to be heard. But we also know that there is always instigators and agitators that are paid from the outside to come into our communities and destroy them. And so we must understand that that happens as well. And so I'm grateful that the media is using words such as white extremists who come in and also vandalize our communities, or they are paid to vandalize our communities. And so that happens, you know, and so a lot of people was angry about the vandalism and a lot of people weren't. For me, I think my opinion, and I say this all the time, I think my opinion is irrelevant. I'm not Black, I'm a non-Black person of color. So to insert my opinion anywhere where Black movements are led is irrelevant. So I was down there to make sure that everybody was okay medically with my friends, and to make sure nobody needed anything. Now, the thing that was pretty special on that evening was, I guess people had been in so many actions before and had been in so many movements before that people were actually prepared. They had their water bottles, you know, they had their masks on, they had goggles, they had solution to spray tear gas out. Like, people were prepared down there. So it's not like they didn't know what they was coming down there for. So I would say anybody who wants to engage or is encouraged to engage in civil unrest, that they know what they're going down there for, because it's not always a pretty situation. I did happen to go down to an action yesterday with one of my seminary sisters who held space for Black Lives Matter at her Unitarian Universalist church. So I did go down in that space yesterday so that I could be there and show up for the white side on behalf of, you know, non-Black person of color, at least the Polynesian community, or the ones that speak out against Black Lives Matter, or speak out with Black Lives Matter, not against. But we must understand that there are also brown communities who do not, or who are anti-Black. So we have to be clear about that as well. So I stand with Polynesians all over the world who are for Black Lives Matter. And so I went down there to share that space on behalf of the people who stand with Black Lives Matter as a non-Black person of color. And I think in that space, I recognize that white people do want to get engaged, and the church wants to be engaged as well. And as far as people not knowing where to start, there's so much everywhere. There's information everywhere where you can start. If you have a BLM in your community, in your city, in your state, reach out to them, ask them what they need. In that space I was in yesterday, I was able to connect with a white pastor who has been openly, you know, open with us in anything that we need. So I shared with him some stuff that we needed. And so he's going to be able to get us some of the stuff that we need. And I think that's the main thing is, you know, if you don't want to engage in civil unrest, check on your Black friends that are engaging in it. Make sure they're okay. Make sure they have supplies. Make sure that you check on their mental health. I mean, even if it's just, hey, how are you doing today? After you know that there's been an unrest, after you know that they've been out there, after you know that their bodies have been on the line, check on your Black friends because they're not okay. To know that, you know, so many of my Black friends and my brown friends that are out there are feeling all kind of emotions right now. I know they are because I feel the same things with them. But not being able to process the feelings of how they're feeling is what's important right now. It's one Black murder after another because that's what it is. It's murder. It's not a killing. We're not going to make it seem like it's, you know, fluffy. Oh, he killed somebody. No, murdered. They murdered Black and brown women. Now, Louisville, in this case, we are standing for Breonna Taylor, which I'm not sure many people are familiar with her story. But she was killed by police officers earlier this year, and people weren't even outraged until it actually became something that was, you know, more national after it became local. So Breonna Taylor was laying in her bed sleeping when they killed her. And they killed her mainly from outside bullets, through a window. And that's a whole story in itself. So we're standing for Breonna Taylor. And we must remember that, yes, there are Black men that are killing at the hands of police, but we have to remember there are also Black women that are dying at the hands of police too. Louisville is in an outrage right now because none of the officers have been arrested. So that's a little unnerving. And the National Guard was called in on us. You know, LMPD was called in on us. You have a president who's sitting in a White House who is telling governors to do anything that they need to do to the protesters, you know, as violent as they want to be. And that's not peaceful. So when you have people who feel attacked in blue uniforms by peaceful protesters who then retaliate on us to make us disperse, you're going to have a situation there. So again, my advice is to people who are going down to, you know, participate in civil unrest. It is our duty as the church to be available to our brothers and sisters. That is why we are the church. You know, Jesus was for the oppressed. And so we must be for the oppressed too, whether it be Black lives or brown lives or poor lives or whatever. But the point of the matter of fact is right now it's Black lives. And we must all wrap our hands around our Black brothers and sisters. And as militant as it may sound, we must wrap our arms around them by any means necessary, as I'm quoting Malcolm X. Thank you.
Thank you, Visha. Every time I wrote down a question, you was reading my mind, and we'll talk about it. So I really don't have any questions for you. Lee, do you have any questions for Visha?
No. Yeah, everything I wrote down too. To make sure to hit on the church folk as we are having these conversations. Yes, so definitely that was much needed to hear. So Visha, do you have any other comments before we go to Alan and his experience?
Yes, so for white members in Louisville, Kentucky who are looking for an outlet or where to start or how to go, LSURJ, Louisville Show Up for Racial Justice, is the place for white people to show up. They have a website, they have a Facebook page. I think there's like a coalition of the interfaith or something like that as well. Like I mentioned, I'm also clergy. So I would, look at anything like that. Also, Black Lives Matter, we do hold things, we do hold spaces. Everybody's welcome there unless, the leaders call for white people to step out of the room while we have conversations, which is normal. That's not a normal. But yeah, that's all. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Visha, for being on and actually speaking and calling the people of faith to action and naming that it is a sin for us to sit idle on the sides while Black and brown lives are dying, being murdered, not dying. You can die of natural cause, but being murdered on the streets. Thank you for that. Next, we will have Alan Kennedy Schaefer, or Alan Kennedy, sorry, you dropped the Schaefer. My bad, we go back. Who is located in Denver to share their experience.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Destiny. We go back more than 10 years and started a community group in Harrisburg called Harrisburg Hope to try to get people to talk together, which I think is missing today. The public officials, the elected officials, the police officials have been literally missing from the conversation and spinning a narrative that is anti-protest and anti-demonstration that is really dangerous to our democracy. As Marcus is highlighting, Black Lives Matter. And I think it's really important to remember that the protests in the streets right now are mainly because a white police officer in Minneapolis put his knee into the neck of a Black man named George Floyd for almost 9 minutes and held it there with 3 other police officers assisting him and not doing anything to stop him. Bystanders cried out and asked them to stop, but the police officers didn't stop. So I think it's really important to remember that. There are, countless other instances like Breonna Taylor and others all over the country every day. I mean, we were protesting a few years ago, with Ferguson and Michael Brown, and here we are again, and the police brutality continues. Nothing has been done. Nothing has changed. That's not to say that it can't change. I think that there are a lot of things that we need to do on a policy level, on a political level, to really rebuild our system and to eradicate the systemic racism that's at the foundation, that is underlying, all of this. The injustices in the criminal justice system, where disproportionately Black people and people of color are incarcerated and we have more people incarcerated than any other industrial nation. And I think that's crazy. We also, and then the response of elected officials tends to be, well, call out the police, call out the National Guard. President Trump, as Visha said, just tweeted encouragement to police and the military to shoot unarmed peaceful protesters. That's horrifying. Cornel West just said that there's a boot on the neck of American democracy, because democracy can't flourish if the people are oppressed, if the people are prevented from protesting, if we are prevented from exercising our constitutional rights, our First Amendment rights. And I think we've seen countless violations of those rights in the last few days. And that's not even including the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and many more. It is important to remember that it took days of protests in Minneapolis and across the country before the officer in Minneapolis was even arrested. And the other 3 officers have not been arrested. So it's really important to remember that it was the protests that even led to that small first step toward justice for George Floyd. I'll speak a little bit about my personal experiences. I'm in Denver, Colorado, and I've been out at peaceful protests here in Denver. And like thousands of others, I was tear gassed this weekend. It was in broad daylight, hours before curfew, on a peaceful march. The Denver police opened fire with tear gas, flash grenades, and pepper balls without provocation, while I was part of a peaceful march down Colfax, one of the large roads in Denver. It should be noted that the police blocked off the road, blocked it to traffic so that the march could go through. And then at a certain point, the Denver police just opened fire. They fired first on peaceful protesters, firing tear gas, clouds of tear gas, filling the streets. It affected not just me, but thousands of others who were marching. Right near me was were journalists from one of the local television stations, and journalists around the country have actually been targeted with rubber bullets, with tear gas, with pepper spray. That also undermines our democracy, because we need the media to amplify what's going on, to shine a light at the police when at the response of the police to peaceful protests. So where I was standing, I was literally on the sidewalk when I was tear gassed the first time this weekend. And I was asking the police who showed up in full riot gear, can I speak to someone in charge? And they were silent. They did not answer. They did not give any warning. They did not give any notice that they were about to open fire on a thousands of peaceful marchers in Denver. And I think that is really, that's really eye-opening for me. Growing up, I've been part of an activist family, a family of teachers and union members and union organizers and civil rights lawyers. And I think that, from my childhood, I always remembered, the police getting on sending out the person in charge with a bullhorn to say, get out of the street, go back to this sidewalk. If you're in the street, after a certain time, you'll be subject to arrest. That's not what happened here. The police didn't do that. And I don't think they've done that anywhere in this country. I think during these protests, the police have shot first. They've opened fire with tear gas and rubber bullets and pepper balls, so-called less lethal weapons, before there was any violence, before anyone threw anything at them. And I think it's really important to separate those peaceful protests, those peaceful marches in broad daylight that are getting fired on by the police from, a handful of agitators who are committing violence and vandalism, primarily at night. And that is important. And those agitators who are committing most of the violence and the vandalism I think there's increasing evidence that they are white supremacists who are trying to cast the protesters in a bad light, to cast a bad light on peaceful protest. At the same time, I think it's also important to remember that protest in general is part of progress. There's no progress without protest, without speaking up for our rights, without speaking up for equality, without speaking up for everyone who has been oppressed for so long, and the systemic injustices that have been present. So I know that for me, it was shocking to see, to be fired on by police while I was on the sidewalk in broad daylight in the middle of the day as part of an incredibly peaceful and diverse, I should emphasize, it was an incredibly diverse march of mostly young adults, mostly young people, carrying handwritten signs saying "No justice, no peace," George Floyd, I can't breathe, and police brutality. That's what this is. That's what is at the heart of these protests. I know it's not cast in that light by everybody, and that's intentional. So I think it's really important to bring it back to the heart of what this is, which is people have to express their frustration, their rage, their opposition to systemic injustice. And frankly, I think that that other methods have been tried before. Colin Kaepernick tried to call attention to it by kneeling at a football game, and he was slandered and harassed and attacked by people who oppose that. And it's those same people who are attacking peaceful protests or attacking peaceful marchers in the streets. So that's really hypocritical. I mean, you can't say that that it's you can't tell people how to protest. You can't tell people how to express their frustration and rage and the fact that we all should be saying that Black Lives Matter. We all should be in the streets expressing our voice for systemic change.
Yeah, thank you, Alan, for that, and for centering some of the conversation around the militarization of police. That is something that I think does get missed out, in that we have militarized and we have a leader. Destiny and I always say we can't really, because we're part of the church, we can't really say the name. So y'all know what we're talking about, but we have leadership within this country who have militarized and who have also, through words, and that's another thing, words matter, tweets matter.
Yeah.
And when you are the president of the United States, you are emboldening these types of actions. And I think as a church and as a people, as a society, to condemn that. And so thank you for centering that.
I'll say it. I mean, that after Ferguson, after Michael Brown was murdered by the police with his hands up, President Obama tried to restrict the use of federal funds and to buy of local police to buy military vehicles, to get military vehicles and military weaponry and military equipment, literally military equipment, like MRAPs and other kinds of military vehicles and weapons, to take that and use them on our streets. And so President Obama tried to rein that in a little bit. And even just that little effort that President Obama was able to do by executive order, President Trump stripped it all away. And he made it easier, President Trump made it easier for local police to get military weaponry. I'm not a stranger to the kinds of weapons that I've seen on the streets of Denver in the last few days. I serve in the Colorado Army National Guard. Of course, I'm speaking as Alan Kennedy, my own views, and not on behalf of the Colorado Army National Guard. But it's, I think, important to recognize that the weapons and the riot gear, the way that the militarized police that the nation has seen in the last few days is what is normally how we fight wars. So that's, to me, also, horrifying. It's a sign that I think too many officials, too many police see our communities as the enemy. And we need to change that. I mean, we need to take back our communities. I think something on a brighter note that I saw in the last few days that fits with what the Presbyterian Church USA is trying to do with engaging young adults is I saw an incredible number of young adults who are coming together, a diverse group here on the streets of Denver, which is unusual for Denver, and marching peacefully together down the public streets and on the public sidewalks, and facing the police together without being violent, without trying to provoke them, and just expressing our voice for change. So it's in that sense, I've been very encouraged by the unity of the people marching, by the peaceful protesters, everyone who's out there, of all colors, mostly young adults. So that's been really encouraging that next generation of young adults, I think is really ready to see change. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you for, like Lee said, bringing up the militarization of local police force, also the policy implementations around the importance of what is going on in our nation. So we want to wrap up our series. And again, thank you for taking the time to come on and voice what you've been experiencing. I know it's not easy, especially being a Black woman. Well, my mom told me I need to sit down because of the COVID if I'm just going to come home to vote. But I chose to sit this one out. But I want to thank each one of you for putting your bodies on the line for me. I appreciate that. So we want to give you all a time. We got a little bit of time, so it doesn't have to be a minute, but keep it brief, to do closing remarks. And we're going to start with Marcus, then Alan, then end with Visha.
Thank you, Destiny and Lee, for allowing me to take part in this open discussion on why we need to continue to fight for police brutality to end. I'll be up in Charlotte, Uptown today to show my protest and my support for everyone that's going to be up there. So thank you again, and I will be back.
Thank you, Marcus.
Alan.
Thank you, Destiny. Thank you, Lee, and PC USA for sponsoring this. And Marcus and Visha, your words are inspiring as well. And I'd like to end by putting the idea of social activism, of peaceful protest, of marching in the streets, literally, in context that for hundreds of years, that is the only thing that has really generated change in this country, because it forces those in power to listen. And sometimes we don't get the change we want, but we have to keep fighting.
Thank you, Alan. Visha, your closing remarks.
So I just want to talk about what Alan just said for just a second, about the unity and the inclusiveness of the actions that have been going around the country and around the world, because it has reached over into Europe and the Middle East as well. So as far as America, all of the actions I've been to have been inclusive. So that's not a normal. And I also want people to understand that as well, because we see lots of people saying, oh, all these white people, but that's really not a normal, especially for actions that are on larger scales. So always thank you for the white, decent human beings is what one of my allies likes to be called, instead of allies. So thank you to all the decent human beings that are of, unmelanated skin tones. Also, I wanted to say, again, just thank you, like the others, for being on here and asking me to, give my input. Being down there is something different, and being active is something different as well. Like Alan said, social activism is something that we must all engage in. And however you engage in it doesn't mean that you have to put your body online. If you can, donate to bail funds in your community, in your state, in your city, that is helpful to bail out protesters whose bodies are on the lines down there. You don't have to actually be involved in the actions if you don't feel like that's the place for you. If your place is just to speak out, if your place is just to hold space, if your place is to give supplies, if that's your place, then that's okay. Don't feel shamed for not being down there with us. Supporting us however you can is what matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Visha. And yeah, that is a really good point. We should have probably started with that point, but I'm glad we ended on it. Not everything is for everybody. And to stay in your lane and do what you can is probably the best way to be an activist and to engage in civil protests. Making phone calls, writing letters, voting, and of course, putting your bodies on the line are just a few ways of how you can engage civilly. Lee, did you have any closing remarks before I close us out?
Yeah, so I wanted to make mention, it is June the 1st, which means we have entered into Pride Month for our queer siblings. And I want and I want to, there you go. And I want to put it out there that white supremacy and racism intersects every part of our being. And so the gay rights movement, queer rights movement started with riots. It started with protests, and it was started by trans people of color who were poor and who were homeless. And so this is not a compartmentalized movement. It intersects throughout all of us. And so to my queer siblings, that I am in that community. And so you are hearing it from a fellow queer person. Show up, speak out, specifically our white queer people. We need to show up and stand up. So I wanted to mention that, and to just mention it that this is Pride Month, but that all this stuff is intersecting. And so that's what I wanted to say, Destiny. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. And thank you for being an amazing co-host. And
Thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you to Marcus, Visha, and Alan. It was by no mistake that you were invited to be here to share your stories today. We wanted to lift up diversity in multitudes of cities, and just to lift up how protests can be done civically, and just to really have the viewers see that a lot of the misconceptions that the news portrays isn't what's really going down on the streets. So thank you for being that prophetic voice. But I also wanted to put a plug in for those who live in Pennsylvania to vote this coming Tuesday. I have to speak to a class. We'll do a recording for a class, and so I have on my If Black Lives Matters vote shirt. And a lot of the issues that you guys brought up around policy, most of them, 9 out of 10, I believe, the one about the water, militarization of local polices, the 9th Street divide, just all of those deal with local politics, and local elections matter so much. If you truly care about Black lives, I encourage you to take it out to the polls, not just in November, but during your primary month as well. So that's my plug for my Pennsylvanians. On Tuesday, I'll be driving back home to vote. I encourage you, if you didn't fill out your absentee ballot, to get out there and vote. Wear your mask, wash your hands, but go out and vote. Any other final words, Lee, before I close this out to segue to our next episode?
Vote in November.
Vote in November. So as you know, this was an impromptu series to respond to all of the action that is going around the world today. And so tomorrow, we hope that you join us to hear about education around COVID-19 and how our young people are responding from graduating and making choices to go to college or to take a gap year or to just see what's going to happen next in this pandemic. So thank you again for joining. Thank you, Lee, my awesome co-host. Thank you, protesters, for putting your lives on the line for me, for my Black life. And until tomorrow, bye.
Bye. Thank y'all.